here are 3 or 4 departments here. Here's HR, finance, IT and administration, and each one of them are shown to have each one of those accounts are credited with having that revenue towards it, aren't they? Or do you do it as a lump sum and just write a budget for a blank check for whatever they're asking for?
Right. So mainly those cover salaries and wages and a portion of operating supplies in that fund. The allocation is based on, in certain cases, headcount. So fire has 11 2/3. So of the total city headcount, it's 5%, they're going to get 5% of those charges. We book all of the budget for the admin, IT, finance, HR in its entirety in the general fund, and then that's shown as a reduction. As an expense recovery.
Due from EMS, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and of course, if that goes away, that's something now that would add to the city's, but the city would have to add to its budget.
Right, it would reduce.
And it's about, if I understand, it's about 200, somewhere in the 200,000 range for next year.
I'm not.
Yeah, Chief, you
want to come up?
I mean, when you're talking about that professional services line, there's more than just that admin allocation in that.
Right.
I mean, that's the payment for LifeQuest services to do the billing. So you really have to break out those components. You can't look at that and just say, oh, it's all just admin, it's all just IT, it's all just finance. It's not. So we pay a considerable amount each month, but it represents at least a FTE and a half software services that LifeQuest is doing the billing on behalf of us, and reporting systems that we just don't have. So we contract that out, and that's, I'd say, at least close to half.
Well, thank you. I was not aware that LifeQuest was a part of that also. And that's something that's going to have to continue no matter what we decide. We're going to be paying for that service one way or the other.
Right.
Whether we would do away with the enterprise account or whatever.
Right. In some way, shape, or form, we have to pay for the billing and collection of our charges in the EMS fund. So today we choose to do that as an outside service through LifeQuest. If we chose to bill that in-house, it would still be an expense.
Jordan and Jennifer, before I ask the council to come forward with any questions they might have, what would you consider to be the most important takeaway that the council could have from this exercise? I know that's sort of,
that's a pretty open-ended and loaded question.
Well, yeah, and I want to hear your professional opinion too, both of you.
I think from my perspective, the EMS fund is not a self-sustaining fund as an enterprise fund should be. And as a council, we have to determine the level of service and the level of commitment in terms of taxpayer dollars that we are willing to commit to make that fund continue to have the EMS service we have today. So evaluating service levels and figuring out.
Are you saying we can do it by still, even if there is a city commitment to do something from the general fund to keep the level of service we're at now, that even if there is that, should we still keep the enterprise fund? Should we keep it that way? Or should we go to just the full general fund?
I think that would be ill-advised. The general fund, while it would receive the revenue and the expenditures that are currently happening in the EMS fund, that increase in the general fund's budget would disqualify the city from expenditure restraint for at least 1 year. And our expenditure restraint money estimate for 2023 is $488,000. So we would be disqualified for that unless significant budget cuts were made in other general fund departments to keep us under the allowable increase in our budget. In doing so, at this time, I don't believe that we would get an adjustment in our levy limit for closing an enterprise fund and bringing it into the general fund. I have requested a response from the DOR on that note to see if there would be an opportunity to increase the levy for that. But at this time, I don't think that would be a possibility. Again, if we close the enterprise fund and bring it into the general fund, that $600,000 cash deficit now becomes the general fund's cash deficit, which is an immediate reduction to the fund balance.
And that would also affect our bond rating, correct?
Absolutely, it would. We just had the negative outlook released from our bond rating. Something like this would
Bring it back.
be detrimental to our rating. Yes. Additionally, maybe a positive, maybe not. We would be allowed to levy for the debt. The outstanding principal and interest payments remaining are $1.14 million. It's about
1.14?
Right.
Okay.
The last payment is due in 2029. So not levying that ultimately hurt the city's cash flow as a total unit because we missed the opportunity to actually get cash from taxpayers. Another slight positive would be the long-term impact of the capital assets, compensated absences, and the retirement wouldn't be a direct hit to the general fund as they are to the enterprise fund because of the way the reporting requirements differ. And then, of course, the admin allocation would be eliminated.
Right.
So I'm not seeing a whole lot of positive reasons to close the enterprise fund and bring that under the general fund's umbrella.
Okay. Jordan, did you want to add anything to that?
I guess I'd just like to say it's probably just really unfortunate that it's a little bit harder to look at a balance sheet item and know that an allowance should have been on it, and just trying to state that technically probably should have been something that the finances area in previous and past probably should have brought up. I don't want this to disparage the EMS teams from their work and the wonderful things that they do for our community. From that standpoint, because an estimate wasn't put into the books when it should have been, and they don't see it until 6 years down the road. So, and that 6 years really relates to the statute of limitations when write-offs are supposed to be done by that time frame, essentially. So can't collect beyond a certain point, and then it becomes a write-off.
Thank you. At this point, are there any aldermen who have any questions? Oh, okay, I'll start down here on the far left.
Thank you. Jennifer, have you looked back and I know you said in 2002 it was barely breaking even. Did you look at the other years, the intervening years there? Was there a time when this fund was doing well? Or has it always been a losing proposition?
No, I think the message to the EMS group was that it was doing well, especially in 2018 in 2019 when we were looking at allocating a larger share of the debt to the EMS fund and implementing that admin service allocation. But what maybe wasn't considered is that just because you have a high fund balance doesn't mean it's all spendable. And some of that fund balance was restricted in assets that had already been purchased. And some of that would have been allocated to the retirement plan, which the state has overfunded for the last couple of years. And so that it creates sort of a false sense of security that you might have money to spend, but you really don't. So that spendable amount like I said before, it was, roughly 400 and some thousand at the end of 2020. At the end of 2021, we're at 279, and I think maybe it was 600,000 at the end of 2019. But that's the amount that's unrestricted, amount that you could apply to future spending. So that's going down significantly every year, and it wouldn't be enough to cover the proposed gap in the 2023 budget, especially since we're going to have to record that allowance.
Follow up, Mr. Passion?
Yes, I was remembering that from when we first discussed that in 2018 of adding the professional services and things like that to it, that the report we had from finance was that the fund is doing well and we can afford to do these things. And I was just curious as to where things switched around.
It really was because we're not recording that allowance. We're not giving a true picture of what's going to be available for spending.
Okay, that's all I had.
Yeah, Natasha?
Hi, thanks. Okay, so I'm hearing that the cons of us putting this into, getting rid of the EMS enterprise fund and putting it in, I hear the cons. We've got the expenditure restraint. We've got, it'll affect our bond rating. The pros are we could levy debt for, levy taxes for the debt for the fire station. We don't have to worry about that long-term depreciation and retirement. This sounds like it would be a terrible idea to do this year, but in the future, would it be
we would still have those same issues in the future. Just to make sure we're clear, we can levy for that piece of the debt regardless of whether this is in an enterprise fund or the general fund. As it's general obligation debt, we can levy that regardless. Going forward, we would always have the expenditure restraint exit for a year. We would always have the bond rating unless we came upon a windfall of money. The cash balance is probably going to remain negative for a time period. I don't see a one-time course correction at this time to correct for that. I think it takes time to build that in.
Still have the floor, Natasha.
I am good, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so the professional fee. If you take out the LifeQuest billing portion of it, do we charge wastewater, police, utilities, library the same fee for use of those admin?
We charge wastewater. We only charge the enterprise funds of wastewater and EMS for that admin fee. The rest of police, fire are serviced by the general fund, and they're in the general fund.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Over here, anybody? Mr. Wetzel?
Thank you. All right, I'm wondering how much, okay, so we have a $600,000+ deficit. How much of that, or maybe I should rephrase that, since we began charging debt service and professional services outside of LifeQuest to the EMS fund, how much have we in total charged that fund for those services?
It's probably very close to that amount. The debt service payments are about $170,000 a year. So for 2021, 2020, 2019, that makes up a big chunk of it. Professional services was about 100 in 2021, probably 80 something in 2020. Maybe 2019 was closer to 50 or 60. So those two events alone probably contribute significantly to the negative cash balance, but also we're just spending more even outside of those items than we collect.
Okay. I heard, I think it was the previous meeting that we had when we were all sitting around in the middle, reference to the fact that these professional services were going to be drastically increasing or had been drastically increasing. Is that correct? Or was it the debt services? There was something that was increasing at a fairly rapid rate.
I think probably the professional services, like I said, I think they were about 60,000 in 2019. And then I think part of that is the increase in headcount. At the time, the headcount may have been 11 2/3, and we added those 3 firefighters, which would have increased that service allocation because it's based on headcount.
Okay.
8 2/3 headcount to 11 2/3. And I think that happened in 2019 or 2020 when we started to see that. So that would account for that increase. And then, whatever increased operational expenses in the admin, IT, and whatever would, as those went up, so did the allocation.
Okay. It seemed like the percentage or the dollar amount that we were being told it was increasing seemed like it was more than that. But okay, LifeQuest took over in 2017. Do we have a problem like this before LifeQuest took over?
I have tried to find out. Obviously, our call volume was much less prior. I think, when we started, I don't know exactly the call volume, so I'm sorry, I won't go there. But and now I've lost my train of thought completely. Could you repeat that?
Sure. In 2017, when LifeQuest took over, we began to develop this deficit. And as we get to that 6-7 year mark, we're going to start writing off things that aren't collectible.
Right.
Did we have this kind of an issue prior to LifeQuest taking over when this was in-house?
Not that I can find. I think, I don't know if there's anybody on the EMS side that could attest to billings and collections at that time. I couldn't find if we were recording an allowance specifically in adding that before they put the numbers in the books. I couldn't really tell, if we had that. But we've also been increasing our ambulance rates, which just exasperates the problem, right, significantly.
So if anything, maybe it's given us the false sense because we have an organization that's doing full billing, that's doing full collections, gives us a false sense that we're going to collect it all when in fact that's not the case. I want to go back to a comment that Jordan made, commenting about how the professional services for LifeQuest, and that's equivalent to 1.5 FTE. Is that what you said?
Well, that's previously what we had.
No, it's not what we had.
Is it not?
No, I agreed with the 2 finance directors ago.
Okay.
He came forth with it was 1.5 FTE, but in reality, it was 2 people doing part-time work, half days each. So it was a 1 FTE. So
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was, I wanted to get clarification on where you came up with that. I didn't know if it was the volume of calls, the volume of billing, what it was. But,
Anecdotally through the meetings that we've been having.
Yeah, back it was when I was first on the council, when we were debating about this, that came forth. All right, the last question I have, how quickly do we need to fill this gap? Is this we need the money right now? Is this like taper it in? Because, we're seeing uncollectibles hitting 6-7 mark. Do we have to fill that gap of that and maybe a little bit more each of those timeframes when we hit that 6-7 year mark? What are we looking at for timing for this?
Oh, that's hard to say. I think we need to take incremental steps in the next budget cycle for certain, as we're facing a large write-off. That is something we're working with our financial advisor on. They've done a really good job on the capital expenditure and debt planning side. So we've started working with him on the operational side. And this would be a scenario that I would want. He's working on a model. So that this would be a scenario that I'd want to have him plug into the model and see where, just how urgent the funding needs might be.
Excuse me, can you, when you say looking at a model, what, a model of what? Of the financing plan or? You're
Not the financing plan, but operationally, how do we maintain, keep our spending intact with, what we anticipate collecting from revenues. So essentially a longer term budget.
You're not talking about an operating plan for the AEMS itself. It's just
no. This would be for
finance plan.
right. This would
Thank
be
you.
for the city as a whole. We've done a good job planning long-term for big spending items, but when it comes to the budget, we look at it kind of in a vacuum on an annual basis. So we're working with him to kind of project that out and see where there would be room to supplement the EMS fund, should we choose to do that from general fund.
I do have a little bit more, but I'm going to let others talk. And
Okay.
maybe wrap back to it. Thanks.
Sure.
Ms. Burrows?
Good evening, y'all. So I just have a couple, I'm trying to clarify everything in my head. Moving forward, okay, so we've anticipated that there's more money there than there is because we were calculating what we were actually billing for. And everybody knows that Medicare doesn't reimburse what you bill. I mean, everybody knows that. Everybody who administers healthcare knows that. So I have a couple of, my question is twofold. How do other organizations do their budget? Because they are dealing with the same thing. So if you have a single physician's office who primarily treats geriatrics, okay, they have a budget also. But they primarily treat geriatrics, probably somewhere in the nature of 90% of their patients would be on Medicare or Medicaid. So how do they do their budget? They've always, they can't be spending more than what they're bringing in. So they've obviously understood that you should have an uncollectible. So we need that.
Right.
So how are we determining going forward what we should be considering as our uncollectible amount, or what our revenue amount really in that account should be?
So we do take our gross billings, and I think from past, it's just sort of been a swag where we reduce it at the billing level by roughly half in 2022. That we know or suspect of all of our billings, roughly half of that will be Medicare, Medicaid adjustments off the top. So we kind of start with a baseline that's less than what we bill gross. And then from there, this is where Jordan and a little bit of me have been trying to work with LifeQuest to develop reports that we can look at to determine what that rate really is. Just because 70% of our customers are Medicare or Medicaid, it doesn't, their billing, their gross billing may be different depending on what service they received from us. So trying to work with them to develop some reports and figure out, okay, what should that initial write-off be? And then, trying to work with them and figure out when do they actually take when they get paid for Medicaid, do they then just give us a number that say, okay, write this much more off, or how that works. There hasn't been any documentation of how that works prior to Jordan and I, starting to take a look at that. So we're working with the provider to give us some reports so that we can start to analyze that piece of it. As far as your question of how other governments might be dealing with that, I think most municipalities will have their ambulance service in their general fund. So it's part of their tax levy. And so they are, based on their community's priorities, allocating money to different functions. Some communities have this as a special revenue fund where they can kind of keep it separately. Then we have, I think we heard Toma is looking at a per capita charge to its city, just like they do to their neighboring communities. So those are ways that we've learned so far that other communities are handling, the fact that they don't collect as much revenue as they pay out. So it's a supplement, like we supplement Parks and Rec. They don't collect as much money as it costs for us to run that program, and neither does Public Works or police or fire.
Okay, so I'm having a hard time getting through this process without being able to determine how we're going to decide what their budget will be, what the revenue part of their budget will be. And it doesn't sound like we're to that step yet.
No, we're not.
So, okay. So, I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out how we're going to figure out the answer to this problem right now. If we don't know what their revenues are, we don't know what they can spend. Nobody does. And so far, you're telling me that, no, we don't have a hold on what the revenue is. And that's fine. I understand you're working diligently on it. I don't take this as a critique.
Of course. I'm
just trying to work this through in my head as to where we're at in this process. And it seems like we're really, really, really still at the very beginning. I want to jump ahead because there were a couple of interesting things said. So this fund started in 2002, and for all intents and purposes, it looks like it was running fine. It looked like it was okay. It looked like it had enough money to pay its bills and to continue to operate. And then we move along. 2018 is when we brought LifeQuest into this. And then nobody really looked at it too closely the following years after that. And then all of a sudden in 2022, it's not running. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out what is the difference between 2002, 2018, besides the fact that we entered a contract with LifeQuest was one of the changes. We entered into a contract with Marshfield Clinic Health Systems to do their intercepts and their interfacility transports. And we added 3 more firefighters' wages onto this fund. Those are the differences, correct? From 2002 to 2000.
I'm not sure what the head count was in 2002. That piece I can't answer, but
okay, so that may be different, but
maybe.
But nonetheless, at some point we added in 2018 we added 3 more for sure.
For sure. Right.
So the changes would be that we started using LifeQuest. We added 3 more personnel in there, and we started a contract with Marshfield Clinic Health System.
And we've been increasing our price for our service,
right?
Without accounting for
true collect.
Right.
Got that. Now, a couple other things with LifeQuest. Have we done any follow up to not see in particular what they're doing with our city, but in general, how are they doing as a company? I mean, when they came and they presented to us, they were already in a lot of communities doing exactly the same thing that we hired them to do, and sounded like they were top notch, at the top of their game. Is that actually true, or are there issues with them billing the wrong CPT codes, billing wrong codes, not rebilling? I mean, do we know that they're doing follow-up? Because I did have a citizen send me a message and just said, you guys really need to look at LifeQuest and see if they're using the right codes, if they're getting rejections, are they rebilling it? Are they gathering the right codes? But do we know if they're doing that? Or who's following that?
May I interrupt? First of all, there's a gentleman from LifeQuest here in the room, but I did not ask LifeQuest to be here for this particular meeting because I thought that would fit better under when we start talking about the EMS thing, the EMS model.
I can withdraw that question
with the chief. Okay, thank you very much.
For the time being, but I would want that answer, and indeed,
we will get that answer.
Come from a LifeQuest person at some point. That's fine, but I think that's really important to know that because do we have money? Do we have collectibles sitting out there that aren't being aggressively gone after because they've either had a rejection and are they being rebuilt? And certainly somebody, I guess, from that company will answer that question. Thirdly, I do have a question. Why every year do you come, or the finance director comes and says, oh, we'd like to write off $30,000 this year? Where did that number come from? Where did we falsely get that very low number from?
So those are claims that LifeQuest has written off prior to the 6-year window because the person has died or whatever, they know for 100% certain that claim is uncollectible, and that would be a bankruptcy or a death kind of scenario.
Somewhere they separate those out then.
Yes.
And they were only giving you that number.
Right. So
on a regular reported basis.
Right.
And when did they report to us the actual uncollectible amount? Was that done yearly? Do we get quarterly reports? Do we get?
That number would show up each month as we record the revenue that we receive and, any adjustments that have to be made, as well as their payment. A part of that is accounts that they have deemed to be uncollectible.
Right.
So we'll see a little bit of uptick of that in 2022. I haven't confirmed with LifeQuest directly, but I suspect there's, when we went to LifeQuest in 2017, we also turned over accounts that were existing. And I think we're starting to see a cleanup of that population of accounts. So we'll see a little bit of, I think we were already seeing probably 50,000 written off in 2022 already.
Okay.
May I interrupt 1 second? I want you to continue that line of questioning, but I just want to remind that we will be trying to keep this to as close to 7 o'clock as possible for the Planning Commission. So, but go ahead, Ms. Bill.
I'll follow up with one. I mean, I have a lot more questions, but because of our time constraints, I'll just do one at this time. Isn't that going to be a rolling amount every year? I mean,
Yes.
Because it sounds like when you present it like this, well, just be prepared for next year because it's that 6-year limit and we're just really going to get hit. But it's a rolling 6-year thing.
Yes.
So it's not going to be just next year. It's going to be the following year. The debts that were in 2018 are going to be uncollectible. The following year after that is going to be the 2019. So we're always going to be reaching this statute of limitations for collecting the debts, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because that seemed a little bit misleading the way that it's been being presented every time that it's been being presented. It feels a little misleading, and so I wanted people who are listening in to understand that that's a rolling year that's going to happen every single year. So it's not going to be a one and done, and we're just going to get hit once really big, and that's it. Prior to hopefully we make the adjustments and figure out what the actual revenues for the EMS fund will be. And I don't know what we can do or how we can fix this until we know that.
Thank you, Ms. Spiros. Mr. O'Reilly, did you pass? Mr. Hendler? Okay, Mr. Fire asked to be recognized.
Everybody should look at from 2002 to 2018, the city did not take any money out of this fund. Now from 18, 19, 20, 21, we're showing a deficit. And we say, well, life's this and this is the fault in this. We are part of the fault. We took a big chunk of change. If it started out at 90,000 and went to 100,000 and not 150,000, whatever it is, every year we took more money. And if you've got $1.4 million, it doesn't take long to get rid of it. So we take part of the blame, but we seem to not add that to the scenario. We're part of the problem, and we have to look at that. Maybe that's one of the parts we have to fill in. Otherwise, we weren't losing any money from 2002 to 18.
Can I follow up to that, please?
Without objection, go ahead.
Okay, but I'm not understanding that you're not convinced we weren't losing money. You're saying that it's unsure because you were unable to tell by the way the accounting was being done.
On the face of the financial statements, the fund has had a positive fund balance each year. I can't tell about the allowance. I couldn't find evidence.
Well, right, but if all those years we didn't have an allowance in there, we have to believe that we were spending money we did not have.
Logically.
Correct?
Logically, yes.
That would be the case even since 2002. If there was no allowance being made, which she cannot determine if there was, then all along this could have been losing money. I will agree that, yes, in the list that I made, I did not add to the fact that we also did start to incorporate this administrative fee. That's another thing to add on to the list of what has changed between 2018 and now. Because I think we need to figure what's changed. Because if we were profitable, and that's a big if we were okay in 2002 through 2000 whatever, and we made these changes, then yes, we need to start to look at the changes that we made as to, is this what caused the problem? And yes, that is an added change that I did not list off when I was making my list. So that's all, but again.
Mr. Barr, do you have something
Can
to
I
add?
speak real briefly? I know we've had a lot of conversation about the administrative charges and growing, and I imagine it seems to many of you sitting here and watching this an hour later on one of our platforms, that's just been patently unreasonable, what we've been charging. You have to realize that the fund balance looked good, it looked solid, and that the intent of the enterprise fund, as it is with wastewater, is to charge the cost as if it's a business. So the fact that they get HR services, IT services, finance services, other types of services from the city, to charge them that way seemed to make sense. It really did. Now looking back and seeing that the fund balance really wasn't what it looked to be because many of these accounts were not fully recoverable, it looks kind of, in retrospect, like, why were we doing that? I'm just trying to give you some context as to why we were doing it, because we've been telling the taxpayers that this is totally supported by separate from the general fund and supported outside of their taxes. Don't worry about it. It's totally not being paid for by property taxes. So to recover costs that we were incurring here from that fund seemed to make sense. But like I said, and I'll say it one more time, in retrospect, seeing that balance really wasn't what we thought it was, I get it. And that's how we have to find a way to move forward.
Thank you, Steve. Jennifer, you have anything any final remarks? Or I see Jordan getting up. I think he has remarks. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
I just want to kind of counter back on we don't know what the revenues are. To that extent, no. We do know what the gross charges are for the services. We do know that there are roughly about 50-ish% in discounts and adjustments that come through. And we do have the accounts receivable balance
that subject is probably best discussed in closed session because we are in negotiations.
Well, I wasn't going to go with as far as cost per services, but I was going to say that you can take an accounts receivable balance and multiply it by your recovery rate for your bad debt collections, which I've been kind of looking at, which is around 24 to 22%, and kind of sizing that up to see what a normal annual bad debt expense would be. That's where I was looking at between $150,000 to $200,000. So if you take that off the top of your revenues, that's about what we should have been recording for 5 years straight.
Okay.
So
you were trying to go forward, like we wouldn't know what our future revenues would be.
Right.
Yeah.
So trying to, because we don't know our customers and what those charges are actually going to be. That's an estimate. Our call volume is increasing.
Sure.
So that is truly unknown for future. In the past, we have that data.
Got you. I'm looking for, not an exact specific number, but somewhere in a ballpark, because I don't know how we decide if we can function if we don't know what the revenues will be. I mean, how do you know what you can pay for and what you can't pay for? So that's fine.
Okay.
Good with that.
All right. Where we're going to go from here? What I'd like to do is have this as an agenda item for a future, not too distant future, council meeting, and where we can digest what we've heard and come up with suggestions or recommendations for the way we should proceed. I want to do this pretty quickly, so maybe even for next week's council meeting would be good. And the reason we want to do that is the budget is bearing down on us, and as you've heard tonight, if we were going to do something incremental with this, we'd probably want to start in this next year's budget. So with that, I'll ask one more time if there's anybody else that wants to speak. If not, I'll turn it back over to Mayor Testrake. And thank you for your forbearance, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. At this point in time, we're going to adjourn. And we will again go to the next meeting. Thank you all for being here. And we need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Witzel, seconded by Tompkins. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All ayes. Thank you.